So we're halfway through June, and the restrictions are supposed to be easing up next week here in Britain. Whether that's actually going to happen is another question entirely. It's probably not going to happen. Future Claude will tell you. But I am booked to go on a COVID-secure, socially distanced, self-catering holiday vacation with my family to Cornwall. And I've been sewing a few summery things to add to my summery wardrobe, but I have realised that the place that we're going is actually incredibly close to where they filmed Poldark. Now, if you don't know what Poldark is, it's an 18th century, early 19th century drama set in Cornwall about tin mining and workers' rights, and it stars the sexy dwarf from The Hobbit and the best friend from Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging. It's really great telly, doesn't take itself too seriously, you know, it's a bit like Downton Abbey or Outlander in that sense, but it's got some absolutely beautiful landscapes in. And as I am now basically a professional content creator, I was thinking to myself, God, wouldn't it be great if I could make an 18th century outfit and wear it at the place where they shot Poldark and get some beautiful aesthetic pictures and film and footage, and I could edit together this lovely little film tribute 18th century style. Now, in theory, that sounds like a great plan, but there are several issues to this. The first one is the time. I leave in 4 days. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, but 4 days is plenty of time to make a dress. Yeah, I can only sew for about an hour at a time, and then I have to take an hour's break. So realistically, I have 2 days. And the second spanner in the works is that I have never made anything 18th century before. The third sand in the gears for this plan is the fact that you may know that I am a mobility aid user in both wheelchair form and in walking stick form. And as a result, 18th century silhouettes are really not ideal, because for me, this motion has to happen. Either walking stick or wheels have to happen. And obviously that doesn't work with any sort of hoop skirt. Also the sort of longer pointed V torso of those 18th century bodices are not very good for sitting down for long periods of time. They're gonna dig in. Why am I doing this to myself? So there's a whole host of reasons as to why I shouldn't be doing this. Am I still gonna do it anyway? I'm gonna give it a go. Oh God, I'm absolutely insane. So I have been thinking about this for a little while, and I do have somewhat of a plan to overcome a few of these obstacles. It's not going to be a historically accurate 18th century dress because, firstly, I hate the 18th century. Everything about it I hate. It's just not my style. I don't like pastels, I don't like chintz, and I don't like ruffles. So, you know, 18th century, not for me. So instead we're going to do a history bounding inspired by vaguely historical 18th century style outfit. Dress, probably a dress, let's be real. And so the other thing I've been thinking about this is what characterizes something as 18th century style for me, because there are several things, like I mentioned the panniers or the hoop skirt, that's out. Sleeve ruffles are also out. They're gonna get tangled in wheelchair wheels. I don't wanna have to be dealing with that. What else? Oh yeah, the long pointed bodice. I'm like not gonna have fully boned stays. Are you kidding me? No, thank you. What else? Sack back? No point. If I'm gonna be sat in a wheelchair for the photographs, I don't want all the detail of this dress to be at the back. I'm thinking about 18th century elements that I can incorporate that are gonna work for me and my needs. I'm thinking a stomacher front. It will automatically read 18th century, and I can still cut it quite high and have the skirts and it be like the V shape will give the illusion, you know, it will be a nod to the 18th century. 3/4 length sleeves, of course, also scream 18th century, regardless of if they have a ruffle or not. What else was I thinking about? Oh yes, possibly some sort of applied decoration. Who knows if I'll have time for that. The other thing is I've got some 18th century chintzy fabrics that have been sitting in my stash for ages because I just don't know what to do with them because I don't like chintz. I'm gonna get them out and have a play and see what I can do. I am not going to be using a paper pan for this, I'm just gonna drape it. I'm halfway through, look, she's got a little sleeve pinned on. I've been working on my duct tape dress form. She now has a slip cover partially done. She needs her boobs sorting out because the boobs aren't right. There will be a video all about the duct tape dress form at some point. If it's already published before this one, I'll put a link. If not, stay tuned, subscribe if you want to see that. So in the meantime, I'm just going to put my bra on her and drape over the bra. And so, yes, I think it's time to get started. I've rambled on long enough. Time is of the essence, Claude. We better get cracking. I apologise for the crazy lighting and the lack of microphone, but I don't know if you can tell, I'm sort of in a chaotic mood, so we're making this video a chaotic one. So at first I was really stuck for ideas about how to make this work, and then I realised that this 18th century modern day thing is actually a really popular trend on YouTube. So I watched a couple of videos for inspiration. I got out my trusty copy of Janet Arnold, this page of undress jackets. There are various jackets in here. There's a Peton L'air and the quilted jacket and things like that. There's little caracos, but I think I want to go for these undress ones because they are much more simple to construct. And I also really like the pleating arrangements of these jackets. Very reminiscent of menswear, which I like. I much prefer 18th century menswear. So essentially, I'm just going to use these as inspiration and drape myself a bodice. She hasn't got a bra on yet, bless her. I'm kind of just going to pick and choose elements from different ones. Probably going to use a sleeve from something else. I've never done that 18th century thing where you set the sleeve with the pleats and like on the body. I've never done that, so I might try that. I might just say fuck it and set the sleeve the way I usually do. Like I say, history bounding, woohoo! Like there's so much 18th century stuff in here I had never realised, and they are all hideous. Okay, so I think, yeah, I'm going to get out my calico and just drape a pattern. This is going to be one of my first times draping, so it's going to be interesting making a pattern for my curvy body with this for the first time. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to drape one half, like I would if I were using my generic dress form, and then I'm going to take it off and copy it and then put that second half of the jacket back on the dress form and fit it before I do the fitting on myself. So I forgot to talk about fabric. So I've dug out my potential fabric options for this history bounding dress. The first one is this one. This is actually quite similar to something that I've seen. Oh bloody hell, the lighting's terrible. I'm so sorry. So the first one is this one. It's the lightest weight and most sheer of my chintzy cottons. This is very similar to actually a print I've just seen in Janet Arnold. So I would like to use this one, but this is a vintage fabric. So it's a very narrow width, and I think I've only got 2.6 meters, 3 yards of it. So I don't know if I'll have enough to do the sort of pleating that I want to do. We shall see. I'd like to use this one, but it will come down to fabric in the end. So that's why we're making a toile. I have this one, which I feel is sort of thematically a bit more Poldarky. It's, if you haven't seen Poldark, she wears Melza. She wears dark, warmer colours. She's a redhead, so I feel like this is a bit more de Melza. It's also a bit more working class because class is a big element of Poldark. I could make it out of this one. I think I've got quite a lot of this. I can't remember, but blues and greys are not really my favourite at the minute, so although the yellow kind of brightens this up, I'm not sure about this one. We shall see. It's another option. And then I have this one. This is like a sateen, a polished cotton. It's no stretch, I don't think. Yeah, no elastane in it. And it is lovely. It's so just perfectly chintzy and 18th century, isn't it? So I don't really know what to do with it. There's not a lot of it. Again, this was a dead stock bit I picked up in a charity shop, so I think there's only 2 meters of this, but it is quite wide, and I'm not sure it's such a wide pattern. You know, if I'm draping my bodice, I don't think I'm going to get a full width of the pattern in so that it's visible. Probably not, so I don't know how well that's going to work. The final option is this IKEA bedsheet set, which again I got in a charity shop. I can tell you how much for. It was the Red Cross. £7. Wow. Okay, that was less than expected. And they tell you what it is, don't they? It's Alvine Kvist. I apologise to all the Scandinavians watching. Alvine Kvist. My best guess. So this, I've got a lot of, so if none of the others work, it will be in this one. But yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about the white. As you may know from when I made that white and blue dress, I don't love white on me. I would rather go for one of these, which is slightly warmer. I may look like an English rose, but I am in fact actually quite yellow undertone to my skin, and so the white just sort of washes me out. I suppose if I had more time, I could tea stain this and make it cream, but that's not going to happen, is it? So we shall see. I'm still holding out hope for this baby. If not, this one might turn into like a chemise à la reine. But first of all we have to start draping. So I've got my scrap fabric down here, my calicos and things. So let's make a start. I used the patterns in Janet Arnold as a reference and just covered the dress form in calico and drew in my seam lines. So you can see here already the difference that having this form is going to make to the fit of this pattern, because obviously centre backs are usually cut on the straight, but this, I was thinking to myself, God, it's so wonky up here. Have I pinned it wrong? But nope, this is definitely the middle of my back. You can see by the location of the hooks. This is definitely the centre of my neck, and yet when you look at those pins, they are not in a straight line. These are much further over, so that's exciting. I then used a tracing wheel and some carbon paper to mark up a second bit of calico for the other half of the bodice. Then I just had to cut it out and pin it all together along those seam lines. So I've got my second half cut and I'm just pinning it together. You can see, I think, nope, it's not in shot. My centre fronts are too, they don't meet, and these seams and this seam were both standing away from the body, so I need to take in these seams and let out the ones on the centre front. I reckon that should sort it because you know, I want it to fit snugly to the body. I think I need to change the angle of the front as well somehow because it's gaping away here. So I think it needs to be a bit more sort of rotated around like that. So I'm going to play with it and see what happens. I made all those alterations and a few more and pinned everything together for a quick fitting. You can see straight away that the bodice is too short in the torso. There were still lots of things wrong with it, the shoulders were not really working and the back neckline was a mess. So I made a few more alterations and then began transferring all of that to a paper pattern so I could cut a second mock-up. So I've transferred my pattern having made the alterations for the fitting. So I now have paper pattern pieces and I've been comparing them to each other just to assess the damage, as it were, as to how they're different. And you can sort of see, so these are the fronts. The front edges are off, the shoulders are really off, but I'm not surprised. Armholes are pretty similar, actually, considering that I freehanded them both. Surprising. The backs are off ever so slightly. The only thing that I'm not sure is my poor draping, because I've done this very quickly, or if it's to do with my asymmetry, is at the waist, at the bottom edge of the waist. Or the waist seam, the angle of the waist seam is off like this. And the back pattern pieces correspond to that. So I don't know if I've just like skewed it slightly when I pinned it. Possibly. I'm going to sew it up and then it'll be easier to see. So I think it's time to get the sewing machine out. Yay, that's exciting. Oh, actually I want to recut these because I've taken this wedge out. So let's see if I can get them out of the same pieces and save some fabric. I then began sewing up the mock-up. This is the moment I realised I'd forgotten to turn my stitch length up, which I tend to do for mock-ups as it makes unpicking easier. I then did a second and a third fitting, but those really didn't go so well. So it's day 2, and after 3 unsuccessful mock-ups, I've decided to scrap everything I've done before. I'm trying not to beat myself up about it. It was useful. I'm still getting used to draping with my duct tape dress form, and while it threw up some like points for the future, it's just not really been working for this. I think as well, particularly because I'm trying to make a very 18th century silhouette without the help of 18th century stays. It's not really working. And because I was basing it on one of those Janet Arnold patterns, I was trying to make like the construction lines absolutely historically accurate still, even though it doesn't need to be because this is an anachronistic dress. So anyway, I have decided to take a change of plan, and I've gotten out my 2 favourite costume drafting books. These are not like They're not historically accurate. They are pattern drafting books like you would expect for modern clothing. This one, of course, is Jean Honeysett, period clothes for period costumes, for stage and screen. I was very fortunate to get this while it was in print 5-6 years ago when I was at university. It's since out of print and they sell for like £200. So it's very useful, but unless you're a professional costume draper, it's not worth your money, in my opinion, particularly at £200, £300, £400 I see them go for. This one is much better for like beginners, for amateur costumers, particularly if you're making clothes to fit you and your size and you're not a standard historical, 22-inch waist, because this book teaches you how to draft your own paper pattern, your own bodice, sloper, block, whatever you want to call it. Look, here we are. And then for each era, from 15th to 19th century, it teaches you how to adjust that pattern. Let me find an example. Look, this is the 18th century bodice one I'm going to be using. So it teaches you how to adjust that basic draft to be a historical shape. Obviously, it's not going to be historically accurate, but there are absolutely times, particularly if you're plus size, I think this would be good for you, because you have to do so much faffing about with any Janet Arnold pattern or Nora War pattern or anything like that, that it's not accurate anymore anyway, when you have to do that proportional grading, when you have to adjust all the seam lines, unless you're making an academic period practice replica for the sake of academic purposes. If you're making clothes for yourself, I think this approach is much better, and you can use this book in conjunction with Nora War or Janet Arnold to add those more historical details, the more historical trim placements, seam cuts, whatever, once you get the hang of pattern cutting anyway. So my plan for this is I'm probably going to do a bit of a mashup. I want to do robings on this dress, and they have a pattern for how to do robings in here, which seems pretty straightforward. And there's a dress pattern in here for a stomacher front, which is something that I haven't really been able to find anywhere else. So I'm going to do a basic bodice draft because I do have a basic bodice block, but I'm considerably smaller now than when I did that, thanks to health issues. So I really need to redraft the basic bodice block, and I really want to make one of my duct tape dress form. I'm getting sidetracked. So I'm just going to draft, got my dot and cross paper. So I'm just going to do a flat draft, quick and dirty, come up with a pattern, and then trial number 4, 5, 6, I don't know, and see if I can't make this work. Because the skirt should be pretty simple. The sleeve, the other thing is, I've faffed about with all those toils so much, God knows what's going to happen with the sleeve. So actually, if I've got like a sleeve draft, that would be really helpful at this point. So we now have 3 days. Yes, 3 days. Let's see if we can do this. I'm absolutely knackered though. I did so many fittings, so much cutting and recutting and draping. Like my arms were so dead by the end of yesterday. So yeah, I'm going to take it a bit easier on myself. And at least with flat drafting, you sat down.
I began by taking some up-to-date measurements using my previous paper pattern as scrap paper. First step in taking accurate measurements is always to indicate the waist, so I tied a bit of elastic around my waist and bent and shifted around a bit to make sure it sat at the narrowest point. First of all, the bust, making sure the tape measure is parallel to the ground at the back. Then I took all the measurements I needed, using that elastic as a reference point for things like nape to waist. Some measurements are easier to do on yourself than others. Then it was time to draft the pattern. I began with the generic instructions as given in the book, and then began adapting it for an 18th century shape, moving the side seam and the shoulder seam and lowering the neckline. So then it was on to mock-up number 4, I think this is number 4. Okay, there are a lot of mock-ups for this project.
It is so hot in here, but I finally have a mock-up that I'm happy with. This is mock-up version 6, 7 maybe? I'm not sure. So the idea is that this will be lacing over a stomacher. I've got my robings, which actually worked quite well. This side doesn't have the alterations on, this side does. So I need to round out the centre back just a little bit to accommodate my stoop. And I've got to adjust this shoulder because I need more room in the front here and less in the back, again, because stoop. I've let the waist out just a touch, I think. Can you see that? I've let it out just a touch. Just so that I can get a really nice V shape. I know with robings, usually they're sort of parallel down the front, but I want mine to have a little V. So, still got to do the sleeve and the skirt, but the skirt I don't think I'm going to be mocking up. I think the skirt's going to be fine. So, yes, we're there.
Once I was finally happy with my pattern, I began preparing the fabric for the dress. In the end, I went with the IKEA bedsheet because I couldn't be asked to figure out if I had enough of anything else. I also reused my twill calico as flat lining.
I apologise for the terrible lighting, but it's getting on now into the evening. I'm really tired. Can you tell? I don't usually work in the evenings, but it's been so hot today I could not face getting the iron out to iron my fabric. So now the sun's starting to go down, it's a bit cooler. So I've ironed my fabric, ready to cut everything for tomorrow. I've completely pulled apart and pressed my mock-up because I want to reuse the calico to make flat lining for the bodice. One of the issues I was having previously was that I hadn't anticipated that I would need some sort of stiffening for a bodice of this type. You know, just one layer of cotton wasn't going to do it, so I'm going to do 2 layers of the duvet because I've got plenty of it, and a layer of the calico as interlining, and that should give the bodice that rigidity that it needs without boning, because I really do not want to put boning in this. I'm not going to do a toile of the skirt, I'm just going to cut it. I'll probably have enough fabric to recut it if I don't, because I think this is a king size duvet. It might just be a double, but I can't remember. So I'm just going to cut it as well. It's essentially a circle skirt with pleats. You know, don't really need to do a mock-up of that. It's probably going to be fine. The only thing they've got to do is the sleeves, which could be troublesome, and it looks like, actually, I had to really lower the armhole, so I'll probably have to lower the armhole on the sleeve as well, because the sleeve head probably isn't going to be high enough. So that is what I'm anticipating, but in the meantime, I need to go to bed, really. I'm really tired. I need to get out of this room because it's so hot. So, see you tomorrow. I swear this video is just going to be an insight into my hot weather wardrobe. So, day whatever we are on now. So I'm really glad I did that ironing last night because I'm ready to start cutting. I think I'm going to start with the skirt panels because they're the biggest and they're going to be the most awkward to manage, and then I can cut the bodice panels on my desk so I can do that sitting down, which should be less strenuous. It's still really hot and I'm so tired, but I'm pretty confident I know what I'm doing now. It's just the sleeve mock-up. And to be honest with you, I'm really not sure about this 18th century sleeve. I feel like, why am I bothering with this historically accurate sleeve? Would I not prefer like what I would call a wench sleeve, or possibly like you might call a cottage core sleeve these days? A big puff sleeve that sort of finishes about here. Would that not look better with this? I don't know. So we're gonna see. I don't know how I feel about the sleeves yet. That's why we're doing a toile. So I've got my support socks on so I can stand up and do some cutting. So I'm gonna crack on with that before it gets too warm to be in this room.
So I had to cut the skirt on the floor. Not ideal. The pattern pieces for the skirt are based on one of those jackets from Janet Arnold, but lengthened to cover my knees. They're just quarter circles with some added pleats, which I tried to keep proportionally wide down to the hem. My patterns had no seam allowance, so I had to draw it on before cutting. I then marked on the sewing lines with a pinwheel, which I then went over with a friction pen. I then began the flatlining process. I did mock boning channels on the stomacher front to add a bit more stability as it was sort of quilted together, but for the main pieces I just stitch along the sewing lines for each piece. I chose to flatline the lining pieces instead of the main, and I regret that having worn the dress, but I'll explain more later. I then constructed the robings for the fashion fabric layer. And created some lacing strips, adding eyelets, which was a fucking nightmare. Honestly, these kits never work. I was hammering for hours.
Okay, so here we are. We've still got funny things happening with the armhole and this section here. So I really need to play with this seam. It needs to be like shorter at the back, longer at the front on the outside edge, and shorter on the front on the inside edge. So essentially I'm going to rotate the seam like this, sort of like you would for a forward shoulder adjustment. I also need to, obviously I haven't attached the skirt, so these two aren't secured to each other, but I think I also need to do like a sink stitch or something and secure it here because this wants to happen, which is not ideal when it's messing with my robings, and seeing as I spent so long patterning them, I want them to look nice. I'm also concerned that it's actually a bit big. I was hoping for more of a lacing gap, but we'll just have to live with it. My other issue, of course, is I had hoped to have this bit of the stomacher sticking out because it's so characteristically 18th century, but then I was going to have the skirt fasten at the centre front, and obviously if it's attached to the bodice, that will hide the bottom of the stomacher. So I'm trying to think of other ways that I could possibly attach the skirt or get around this stomacher situation so I can have it poking out at the bottom. Yeah, I don't know. I need to think about it. I need to play around with it. But I need to change this shoulder seam because it's really not. You can see that gap in there is not what we need. I do have a very forward shoulder though, and as much as I like to pretend when I do fittings that my posture is like this, let's be real, it's not. So yes, change the shoulder seam, skirts, figure out the lining situation and the skirt fastening. Oh, and the yellow ribbon is not what I'm going for, it's just the only narrow ribbon I think I have. I'm going to look for something else in my stash. Yes. Okay, see you in a bit.
Next, I drafted a sleeve pattern. In the end, I went for more of a capped sleeve, but with a lot of flair. A bit more mid-century. It's a very basic sleeve draft using the armhole curve up to the point where the arm meets the body, and then I just estimated a curve and flared out the hem. I then pinned and tacked in the sleeve for a mock-up. I made it out of the bedsheet as I had plenty to recut if needed. I adjusted the sleeve head a bit, but then I simply hemmed the sleeve and chucked them in. They're by no means perfect, but I had kind of forgotten about the 18th century shape of my armhole and didn't account for that when cutting.
We have sleeves.
So then it was on to the skirt construction. Very simple really, joining the skirt side seams and leaving a little opening at the centre front. I then neatened the seam allowances with pinking shears and pressed those seams open. I then began arranging the skirt pleats, pressing them in place and then pinning them in position and allowing them to cool for a crisper line. To keep those pleats in place, I machine basted the waistline of the skirt before joining it to the fashion fabric of the bodice. I was going to use the lining to neaten the raw edges. Then all those seams got pressed inwards so that they would be hidden by the lining. I turned under the raw edges of the lining and pressed them under and pinned them in place. For the bottom edge of the bodice, I machine tacked the seam allowance up before doing something I never usually do, which is a sink stitch, also known as a stitch in the ditch. They do it a lot on the sewing bee, which I've been watching again recently, and I wanted to try it, but it turns out you actually need a lot of arm strength to pull the seam apart enough to do it invisibly, and I really struggled with that. So for the armholes, I took the decision to herringbone them down by hand. Then I added a few hooks and poppers to the skirt opening, and the dress was complete. Time to head to Cornwall. This is at the original 18th century harbour at Charlestown in Cornwall. And look, Poldark was here! I'm really pleased with my finished dress, and what a treat to wear an 18th century inspired dress to an actual 18th century harbour. It was such a beautiful spot, and I'm so glad this piece of working class history has been preserved. There was even a tall ship out in the distance. As for the finished dress, I think I was able to capture the essence of early 18th century dress, but in a way which works for me, and I'm really proud of that.
So I don't usually do this sort of post-match analysis, but with this project there are a few more things I want to talk about. So absolutely, this dress is not perfect. The fit, honestly, is not great. Weird things happened. I think the bust point is too high, or I don't know, it tilts up or something. I don't know, the shoulders. Getting the shoulders right was an absolute nightmare, and I still don't think I achieved it. That was made more complicated by the robings, of course. Also, the sleeve. The sleeve just isn't really fitting into that armhole correctly. And you know what? I'm absolutely fine with that. This project was so freeing because I learnt so much. There are a lot of firsts in this project. I don't think I've ever worked with a project that required negative ease before, particularly when I was draping myself. Guess what? I didn't get it right, but I learnt a lot, and I will know more for next time. Also, like, I've never done 18th century like this before, so I learnt a lot about the 18th century. Still don't like it, but I'm better informed than a few weeks ago. I also just had so much fun. It was just nice to do a project where there wasn't a deadline and there wasn't a contract and there wasn't a design brief. I didn't have a vision in my head that I had to fulfill. I just winged it and saw what happened. I didn't even know which fabric I was going to use when I started out on this project, and that was really liberating, and it reminded me why I started this channel. Because the reason I wanted to make videos like this on YouTube was because I wanted an excuse to keep learning, to keep getting better and try new things, because even though, yes, I have professional training and professional experience, there are still times when I don't know what I'm doing. And I think embracing that as a maker, acknowledging that I'm still always going to be learning, there's still always going to be something that I've never done before, has been really good for me. And I've sort of been reevaluating what I want to make, what I want to do. And I think I'm going to do a few more of these projects, just silly projects for the fun of it, and just to give me an excuse to try something completely different. So I hope you enjoyed this project. I'm still going to wear this dress. I'm still really proud of it in spite of all the things I said about it. And it's reminded me that I want to keep learning, so let's keep learning together. You can subscribe to this channel if you'd like to continue to watch me flail about and have no idea what I'm doing. But also leave me a comment, let me know what you want to learn, and maybe I can make a tutorial for you, or if there's anything you're curious about from this project. Whatever it is, let's keep learning. This is the educational part of YouTube. That's what we do. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. See you next time.